One day, as I was preparing dinner in the kitchen, I heard a strange noise from my daughter. "Mom, oh no, this can't be," she exclaimed. I quickly turned off the stove and rushed to the dining table where she was sitting. "What on earth is this?" I gasped in shock. To my surprise, there was a wiretap device on the table. Who could have done this, and why? "My name is Gwen, a 37-year-old housewife. I live with my husband, Oscar, and our daughter, Lynn." "Mom, hurry up," Lynn urged. Okay, just a second," I replied, trying to calm my nerves. Lynn is a 10-year-old elementary schooler who loves swimming and never misses her weekly lessons. Watching her grow into a kind and cheerful girl fills me with joy. The three of us, my daughter, my husband, and I, get along very well and live happily together. But life isn't without its challenges. Our main problem isn't with each other, but with my husband's mother, my mother-in-law. She and my father-in-law live just a 15-minute walk from our house. My mother-in-law dotes on her son and has always been uncomfortable with the idea of him not living by her side. At one point, she insisted that we move in with her. She was relentless, but I was determined to maintain our family's independence. My husband, fed up with her constant interference, told her firmly that we couldn't live with her. However, my mother-in-law didn't give up easily and repeatedly insisted on moving in with us. To appease her, we eventually compromised by moving into a house within walking distance of hers. My father-in-law helped convince her, and for a while, things settled down. Even though we lived nearby, my mother-in-law continued to intrude on our lives. During the holiday season, we always had to visit her because of the proximity. Despite my husband and I trying to maintain our distance, she would use the neighbors to pressure us. "Why don't you take care of your mother? Your wife isn't doing her duty. Your mother is in pain, and she went through so much to give birth to you. As the eldest son, it's your responsibility to care for your parents," they would say, echoing her sentiments. Each time, we ended up having to go to her house to keep the peace. I wished she would be as kind to me as she was to her son, but she saw me as an enemy. Every time I saw her, she would pick on me. "When you're feeding Oscar such terrible food, I can't believe it. I feel sorry for him. I wish I could cook for him every day," she would sneer. "Mom, how can you say such things?" "Stop it." My husband would always defend me, but her persistence never waned. "How can it be that you've been married for 2 years and still haven't had a baby, Gwen? I think you might be infertile," she once said, shocking me with her cruelty. Even my husband was furious. "Mom, enough. We're not in a rush. Besides, having a child is a blessing, not something you can force. Don't assume Gwen is infertile based on your feelings. It could just as easily be me," he retorted, with my father-in-law backing him up. "Oscar's right. You can't predict when you'll be blessed with a child. Don't look down on Gwen just because you had a baby early," my father-in-law added. My mother-in-law finally calmed down after their intervention, but the peace was short-lived. Soon enough, she resumed her bullying. When our daughter was finally born, my father-in-law was overjoyed to welcome his first granddaughter. I hoped that having a grandchild would soften my mother-in-law's attitude, but her reaction was far from what I expected. "What? It's not a boy? Are you kidding me? It's your duty to give birth to a boy since you married the eldest son," she complained, completely disregarding the joy of the occasion. After all the pressure she had put on us to have a child, she now had the audacity to complain because our baby wasn't a boy. My husband and father-in-law were equally appalled by her behavior. It became clear that she simply disliked everything about me. As our daughter grew, my mother-in-law showed little affection for her, and Lynn, even as a child, sensed that her grandmother didn't like her. As a result, she became attached only to her grandfather. Seeing this, my mother-in-law's anger grew, and she began to treat both my daughter and me even worse. Despite Lynn being her son's child, my mother-in-law criticized her character, saying, "Even though she's Oscar's daughter, she's not of good character." The situation was heartbreaking, and I wondered how much longer we could endure her relentless negativity. I wondered if she was insinuating that Lynn only inherited my worst traits, or worse, that Lynn wasn't even Oscar's child. That was the final straw. "Please don't make such accusations," I snapped at my mother-in-law. "Lynn is Oscar's and mine. What kind of nerve do you have to say something like that?" "Oh, you're getting upset like that because you're hiding something, aren't you?" she sneered, as if enjoying my anger. "Stop it," I shouted. "You've gone too far. We're leaving." My father-in-law was out shopping and Oscar was in the other room on a work call. I quickly got Lynn ready, put on her shoes, and headed to the door. When Oscar noticed us leaving, he came over, surprised. "What's going on? What's the matter?" "I'm sick and tired of your mother's horrible attitude," I replied, my voice shaking with frustration. "Did Mom say something again?" She started questioning if Lynn is really yours. "What?" She said, "What?" His face turned red with anger, and he called out to his mother. "Mom, are you serious? How can you say such a thing?" But she didn't even flinch. I just said what I thought. "Oscar and Lynn don't look alike." "Are you kidding me? We're leaving and we're never coming back." Oscar grabbed his things, put on his shoes, and we left the house, heading home in silence. "That was ugly," he finally said as we got inside. "How insane is she? Does she have any morals at all?" I sighed. "Lynn's just entering a sensitive age. It's terrible that your mother would say such disgusting things, planting negative thoughts in her head." A little later, my father-in-law called Oscar, asking why we left. When Oscar explained what happened, his father was appalled and promised to give my mother-in-law a stern talking to. But despite their anger, my mother-in-law never stopped bullying me. I was sure she continued to find ways to annoy both me and Lynn. One evening, Oscar turned to me and said, "Let's stop going to my parents' house." "What? But what about the neighbors? They'll start saying things again, telling us to be good to your mother." "Then ignore them. The neighbors are just strangers. We don't need to care about their opinions." He was right, and I felt reassured. My mother-in-law might be good at manipulating the neighbors, but as Oscar said, we just needed to ignore them. We used to feel guilty every time one of the neighbors criticized us, but now I didn't care what the outside world thought. We were united as a family, and that was all that mattered. After that, we stopped visiting my in-laws. My mother-in-law tried contacting Oscar, asking why we hadn't come over, but we stood firm. We were done letting her control our lives. I couldn't fathom how she even managed to contact him like that in the first place. Did she not realize she was the cause of all this? Or did she simply want to see her son, knowing full well she was doing the worst possible thing? Regardless, we were resolute. We would never go to my in-laws' house again, and we certainly wouldn't allow my mother-in-law to come to ours. As we started living like this, the neighbors began to meddle, offering their unsolicited opinions. But I didn't pay them any attention anymore. I would politely thank them for their concern and pretend to listen, but inside, I was completely indifferent. Thanks to this newfound distance, we were finally able to live peacefully for a while. My daughter no longer had to see her mean grandmother, and she seemed happier every day. I found myself wishing we had cut ties with my mother-in-law much sooner. By the way, my father-in-law never did anything wrong, so we still met him for dinner occasionally without my mother-in-law's knowledge. My daughter adored her grandfather and loved these dinners with him. We were enjoying our lives and spending happy days together. But then something unexpected happened. One day, as I was preparing dinner in the kitchen, I suddenly heard my daughter make a startled noise. I wondered what she was up to, but I was in the middle of cooking and couldn't step away. I decided I'd ask her about it later. "Mom, I can't get it off," she called out, sounding surprised. "What's going on, honey?" "Come see this. Hurry. I'm putting the pot on the stove. Just give me a moment." "Please, just come," she insisted. Sensing her urgency, I turned off the stove and hurried over to the dining table. What is this?" To my shock, there was a wiretap sitting right there. "Who did this, and why?" I whispered. "Mom, this can't be happening." My daughter was starting to panic. Quickly, I covered her mouth and typed a message on my phone. "Don't say anything. We don't know who might be listening." She nodded silently, understating the gravity of the situation. There might be other wiretaps in the house, and we had to be careful. I stepped outside and called the police. When they arrived and conducted a thorough search of the house, I learned something truly shocking. They found one wiretap under the dining room table, another in our bedroom, and yet another in my daughter's room. We were horrified. We had no idea how long this had been going on, but someone had been eavesdropping on our private conversations at home. The police explained that the placement of the devices suggested it wasn't the work of an amateur. They warned us that now that the bugs had been discovered and removed, the person responsible might come back to check on them. The police advised us to be very careful and assured us they would increase patrols in the neighborhood. My husband had just left on a business trip that day and wouldn't be back for a while. Given the circumstances, it wasn't safe for my daughter and me to stay in the house alone. We decided to stay at my parents' house until my husband returned. I didn't want to alarm my husband while he was on his business trip, as it might distract him and cause unnecessary worry. I decided it was best to wait until he got home to tell him what had happened. My parents were deeply concerned when they heard that our house had been bugged. They were furious that someone would do something so vile and insisted that whoever was responsible needed to be caught as soon as possible. My daughter was also very upset and scared. "Mommy, I forgot my stuffed bunny," she said, her voice trembling. "Oh, you did," I replied gently, noticing how close she was to tears. She always slept with that big stuffed rabbit as her pillow, and in her current frightened state, there was no way she'd be able to sleep without it. Seeing her distress, my father immediately suggested we should go and get it for her. "I'll go with you," I agreed. "Thanks, Dad," I said, grateful for his support. Together, my father and I returned to the house. We were both on edge, aware that someone could be lurking around. Moving cautiously, we entered the house and retrieved the stuffed animal from my daughter's room. Just as we were about to leave, we suddenly heard the front door unlock. My father and I froze, covering our mouths to stifle any sound. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, and my heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. My father stood protectively at the entrance to my daughter's room, his eyes fixed on the hallway. The footsteps passed by us and headed into the living room. It became clear that the intruder was likely there to retrieve the bug from the dining room table. My father and I exchanged a look. We needed to get out while we still could. Quietly, he opened the door and peeked into the dining room. "What? Oh my God," my father whispered in shock, his eyes widening in disbelief. I whispered angrily to my father, "Dad, don't make a sound." He turned to me with a puzzled expression and asked, "Is that Oscar?" "What?" I whispered back, shocked by his words. Unable to contain my curiosity, I slowly opened the door and peeked into the living room. To my astonishment, there was my husband checking under the dining table. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. Why was my husband at home when he was supposed to be on a business trip? And why was he examining the spot where the bug had been found? "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping into the room. He froze, startled, and then turned to me with wide eyes. "What are you doing here?" he stammered. "That's my question," I shot back, my voice trembling with confusion and anger. "I thought you were on a business trip. What's going on here, Oscar?" He started to stammer. "Oh no, it's just that." Before he could finish, the front door opened, and we heard a high-pitched, familiar voice. "Oscar, did you recover the listening device?" It was my mother-in-law. "Mom," Oscar began, but then he noticed her shocked expression as she finally realized we were standing there. "Why? What's going on?" I demanded, slowly piecing the situation together. "Oscar, you did this with your mother? You bugged our house?" Seeing no way out, my husband's shoulders slumped as he began to explain. Because you're having an affair, aren't you?" "What?" I was utterly baffled. "What are you talking about?" "The neighbors. They said they saw you with some guy, walking around, letting him into our house during the day, and even going into a restaurant together." I stared at him in disbelief. "What are you saying? I have no idea what you're talking about." "I kept getting reports of your supposed affair from different people, and I started to think you were being unfaithful," he admitted, his voice cracking. "Mom even said that Lynn and I don't look alike, so I talked to her about it. She convinced me to bug the house to get evidence of the affair. So I did it, and when the wiretap suddenly stopped transmitting on the day I said I was going on a business trip, I thought something was wrong, so I rushed back to check on it." My mind reeled as his words sunk in. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Unbelievable," I muttered, feeling a surge of anger. "You did all of this because you believed baseless rumors? You let your mother manipulate you into thinking I was cheating on you? But when you keep hearing something like that, you start to believe it, don't you?" He tried to justify. "Don't be ridiculous," I snapped. "Do you really think I would do such a thing? If you can't trust me, why did you just hire a private detective or something? And if you doubt that Lynn is your daughter, why not just do a DNA test instead of this insane behavior?" Oscar's face crumpled as he realized the gravity of his mistake. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I did terrible things to you. Please forgive me." But it was too late. I shook my head, tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. "It's too late to apologize. I can't do this anymore. Let's get a divorce. No, please, he begged, desperation in his voice. I was wrong. We're a family, right? Let's stay together as a family. That's enough, I said coldly. I'm so disappointed in you. I can't stay married to someone who so easily believes rumors. Just then, my mother-in-law interjected with a spiteful tone. Oscar, aren't you glad you're getting rid of this woman? I'm sure she's having an affair, even if she's hiding it. You should get rid of this woman and her daughter once and for all and find someone new, my mother-in-law spat out, even in the middle of such a tense situation. Before I could respond, my father stepped in, shielding me. Why would the neighbors lie like that? Did someone make them say it? What do you think? He stared intently at my mother-in-law. She flinched but quickly retorted, I don't know. Why should I know? My father didn't back down. If this is all based on lies, then it's a serious issue. My daughter could sue the neighbors for slander. That's right, he continued. Because of the neighbors' rumors, Gwen and Oscar's marriage is falling apart. Should we start telling them now that we're going to sue? My mother-in-law instantly panicked. That's too much. They were probably just joking. My father pressed on. A joke? That's even worse. They should be held accountable. Why not? You can't do that, she protested, her voice shaky. Why not? My daughter is being falsely accused of infidelity. People who spread lies like that should be punished, my father declared. He then turned to me. Gwen, let's go. I nodded, slipping on my shoes and heading for the door. But just as we were about to leave, my mother-in-law broke down, tears streaming down her face. It's me. I told her neighbors to give Oscar false information. I stopped in my tracks, shocked. I took off my shoes and turned back to face her. Is that true? She nodded, still on her knees. Yes. I thought that if Oscar divorced you for having an affair, he'd come back to live with me. Oscar's eyes widened in disbelief, and then his face twisted in anger. Mom, you've got to be kidding me. What were you thinking? Don't you feel ashamed? He turned to me. When I had nothing to do with this. It's all her. But I met his gaze coldly. No, Oscar, you're the one who bugged our house. I don't trust you anymore. Lynn and I are done with you. I'm divorcing you. With that, I left the house with my father, leaving both my husband and mother-in-law slumped on the floor, their faces pale with shock. Later, I went straight to my lawyer to begin divorce proceedings. I also confronted the neighbors, offering them a deal. In exchange for not suing them, they had to tell me every detail of what my mother-in-law had asked them to do. They confessed everything, confirming that she had orchestrated the entire scheme. As a result, the court accepted my claim, and I was awarded alimony and child support. My mother-in-law's actions even led to her own downfall. Her husband divorced her and kicked her out of the house. She tried to cling to Oscar, but he wanted nothing to do with her after realizing she had caused our divorce. Now, she's living alone in a small apartment, working part-time to make ends meet. As for me, I got a new job and started working full-time. My parents helped me take care of Lynn, who has moved on from her father and is putting all her energy into swimming, something she's loved for a long time. I'm determined to work hard and build a good life for her, focusing on what matters most, her happiness and well-being.